Would you believe for 6 years I've been saying to myself, someday he'll come to town?
No, I don't believe it.
The man I used to love.
Not true at all.
And I'll read about him in the newspapers and just pick up the telephone.
Carla, you look wonderful.
Clint, it's so good to see you. And I did so love you. For a little while.
So, who's the lucky man who took the prize home? You haven't told me you're married now.
Mrs. Norman Gregg. And he's an engineer, electronics, and very brilliant. Come on. Sort of nice. Aha! They laughed at me when I said I could produce the eminent Clinton Judd.
How do you do, Mr. Judd?
Mr. Gregg?
No, I'm not Mr. Gregg. My name is Moss.
Oh,
Henry Bellman, Mr. Judd. Mr. Moss and I are both attorneys.
where's Mr. Gregg?
Mr. Gregg is in Zurich.
And Zurich is in Switzerland.
I know where Zurich is. Carla, things are beginning to come back to me. A lady as devious as she was beautiful.
Oh, no, I've reformed. I'm very sincere now. And I sincerely asked you to dinner because I sincerely wanted to see you again. Oh, you sort of have this problem, and you could handle it better than anyone else.
And not purely for friendship, Mr. Judd. We all work for Malcolm Iverson.
Iverson Steel, Iverson Electronics, Iverson Aircraft.
I know who Malcolm Iverson is.
Mr. Iverson is willing to pay you literally anything you want to handle this. Fair enough?
I don't know. Handle what?
Yes. Well, there's a situation here that requires calling the police. Ordinarily, the police might want to question Mr. Gregg, but Mr. Iverson doesn't want Mr. Gregg brought back here right now. Disturbed at his work, distracted, you understand?
And especially since Norman had absolutely nothing to do with this situation.
Just what is the situation?
Judd, for the defense.
Mrs. Gregg assures me that her husband can't identify the body either, and we're hoping, Sergeant, that it won't be necessary to interrupt Mr. Gregg at his work in Switzerland just so he can tell you that himself.
I see.
See what?
Why they've hired you. Serves notice. If we want to talk to Gregg, we've got to get a court order. And that's going to be fought every inch by Clinton Judd, right?
Sergeant Wagner, I said no such thing.
Well, relax. Nobody wants to cause these people any unnecessary trouble. Now, we find no identification on the body so far. Did Mrs. Gregg know if anyone might have removed the wallet or papers or so on?
No, she says no one's touched the body since she found it.
No idea how he got in her motorboat.
Yeah, there she can make an educated guess if you want guesswork.
Well, I'll take what I can get.
All right. About a week ago, a party was given here, a farewell party for Mr. Gregg. A couple of the guests took the boat out for a spin and didn't tie it up too well when they brought it back.
Feeling no pain, huh?
Apparently. The following day, a storm came up and the boat was blown loose. The Gregg's handyman found it that night piled up against somebody's dock and swamped. Now, that much is fact. Now, Mrs. Gregg supposes that the dead man fell into the lake at some point, and the wind and waves drove the body into the swamp boat. The
handyman see the body?
No, he had his hands full getting the boat onto the trailer in the dark. No one saw the body until Mrs. Gregg checked the boat this morning, planning to take it out.
I'd like to talk to the handyman.
He's in Switzerland, too. Doubling as Mr. Gregg's chauffeur.
And Mrs. Gregg, where would she be by now? Climbing the Matterhorn?
Now, you relax, Sergeant. She's right inside. Oh, where's Carla?
Well, she went upstairs to lie down. I'm afraid she isn't feeling very well. Well, it's pretty rough on a woman to have to face a thing like this alone.
How do you figure alone? I see several high-priced talents running interference for her.
Sergeant Wagner, nobody's going to interfere with your need to question Mrs. Gregg. Just tell me when and where you'd like to see her, and she'll be there.
Mr. Judd, we haven't really...
He seems to be saying something different.
He doesn't represent Mrs. Gregg. I do.
Captain's office, 10 o'clock tomorrow. Okay, Mr. Judd?
Okay, Sergeant.
It's my fault, basically. I didn't make it clear. Carla can't submit to questioning by the police.
Why can't she?
Because Mr. Iverson doesn't want her to. It's in line with his policy of supporting and protecting his key people. If a key man shouldn't be harassed and disturbed, neither should his wife. Because that will disturb him.
It's nice in many ways to be a member of the Iverson Key Group. Very sheltered and very protected. Sometimes it seems like you just make a wish and snap your fingers and presto, it's there.
Mm-hmm.
There's one hitch, however. If Mr. Iverson wants anything, you don't dare antagonize him.
Meaning you won't keep that appointment with the police?
Oh, Clint, I can't.
Do you realize that you could be giving them grounds to arrest you on suspicion?
Suspicion of what? I didn't do anything.
Well, then why won't Iverson let you talk to the police?
I'm not a very good liar.
What have you been lying about, Carla?
Well, I knew who that man was. He's an artist. His name is Roger Santini. And I met him in Mexico about a year before I married Norman.
And?
And practically nothing. We had a few drinks and some silly conversation. Did I ever go out to dinner with him? Maybe once. I don't even remember. On the other hand, I remember exactly how many times I had dinner with you.
When did you see him last?
About 2 weeks ago at Norman's farewell party.
He was a guest at your party.
No, he was a waiter. You know, like most artists and actors, I suppose he couldn't make a living at it, so he had to work at weddings and parties.
How did he get into your motorboat?
Now, that I told you the truth about. I really have no idea. So Mr. Iverson said, just say you don't know anything about anything and be done with it.
And let me make all the false statements to the police.
Clint, he doesn't want Norman involved.
That I understand by now. What I want to know is how much is Norman involved?
He was in Zurich. We were setting up some kind of processing plant data or something when I found the body. If you were to call him on the phone, he wouldn't even know what you're talking about.
Well, I'd like to sit down with Norman and have him tell me that himself. So you ask him to come home.
Clint, be reasonable.
Okay, I'll be reasonable. How do I get to see Iverson?
That's difficult. I could get a message to him. You know, very few people get to see Mr. Iverson.
All right, here's the message. I'm going back to Houston,
Man.
where I'll issue a statement retracting what I told the police on the grounds that I can't prove any of it. And if Mr. Iverson doesn't like that, I may let him in to see me.
Where is he? He's in New York. He went to New York knowing that I was coming here?
Yes, sir. He has other cases. He felt that I was competent enough to handle the present stage of this one.
Well, Judd has made a very serious mistake.
Which is simply whether we're going to remain on the case or withdraw.
You will not withdraw. That's why I'm here, to make that perfectly clear.
Mr. Iverson, please, won't you sit down?
Don't tell me what to do. If Mr. Judd withdraws, it will prejudice the Gregg position. It will reflect on me as Norman Gregg's employer. It will affect the market position of Iverson Industries. And I'll instruct my legal staff to file suit immediately for not less than $10 million.
You probably couldn't win.
But I could put him through the trouble of defending himself through the courts for at least 5 years.
Yes, you could do that.
Yes.
Mr. Iverson, we will remain on this case under one condition.
Don't try to make conditions with me.
We are already working on the case. As a matter of fact, I just came back from a short trip to your city.
Good.
Where I interviewed several of the guests at the farewell party for Norman Gregg.
With what results?
Strange results, Mr. Iverson. Yes, it was in fact a farewell party for Norman Gregg, according to those people who are also employed by Iverson Industries, but, well, according to the others, they didn't know Gregg was going anywhere. They just thought it was another party, which would make it appear as though you had no intention of sending Gregg to Zurich until after Santini was killed.
What was the condition you wanted to make?
Gregg comes back now.
Iverson Aircraft has a private airport. At the end of runway 35, there's a radar check. 9:30 tomorrow night. Be there.
It's a matter of overreacting.
Overreacting to what, Mr. Gregg?
The entire relationship between my wife and me. You see, I don't spend too much time with Carla because of my workload. I suppose you might say that's why I did it.
You did what, Mr. Gregg?
I killed Santini.
Well, why don't you just tell us what happened?
It was the party that night. I hadn't seen Carla in about an hour. And all of a sudden I saw her going up the stairs. She was scratched, beaten, her gown all torn. She told me about Santini, how she'd known him slightly in Mexico and that he'd made some crude advances to her then. Only this time, he attacked her. When she told me, I don't quite know what happened. Something came over me. I can only try to reconstruct what I must have done.
Well,
I picked up something heavy, a brass candlestick probably. And I went after him, and he must have run away, and apparently I caught up with him by the water. And for the first time in my whole life, I struck a man. Only once, I think.
did you know that you'd killed him?
Yes. I can remember looking down at him. Then I called Mr. Iverson, and he told me that he wasn't about to lose my services over a thing like that, and that I should go to Zurich immediately.
Mr. Iverson told you to go to Zurich, and you just went?
Yes.
Well, Mr. Iverson told your wife what to say to Mr. Judd, and she just said it. He told her how to have the body innocently found, and she arranged that. That was all right with you?
Well, you have to understand that before I went to work for Mr. Iverson, I was what you might call a routine engineer.
Well, what's that got to do with it?
Way of life, money. Mr. Iverson, he has enough money, he can do almost anything he wants. If he wants to help me out of this, why shouldn't I let him? After all, without him, how could I afford a lawyer like you?
All right, then. If you're now taking advice from me instead of Iverson, we'll go straight from here to the nearest police station.
All right.
Correction, here to the nearest Immigration and Customs office. He flew directly from Zurich to a private airfield.
Iverson's key people don't even know when they're in the country illegally.
On the one hand, the district attorney doesn't want to antagonize Malcolm Iverson. And on the other, he has to satisfy the voting public. So he simply drops the whole problem on the desk of this hard-working assistant. And Mr. Judd, you've got to help me dispose of it.
Glad to.
Respectable citizen is told his wife has just been attacked. He loses his head. Well, nobody wants to throw the book at him for that.
I'm sure you don't.
But there is no open season on amorous waiters.
Granted.
So how are you going to defend?
That depends on the charge.
Well, you've got to go the route of irresistible impulse, I assume, temporary insanity.
Oh, come on, Mac. Quit stalling. You've had my client locked up overnight. You haven't arraigned him yet. That means you don't know what to charge.
Because I'm trying to be reasonable.
All right, let's see how reasonable.
Plead him guilty to voluntary manslaughter. How's that? He killed Santini in the heat of passion. That's 2 to 10 years. He'll be out in a year and a half. Now, I think that's a pretty good deal.
Oh, I could think of a better one.
What could be better than that?
Involuntary manslaughter. My client was in a confused, emotional state. If he had some foggy notion of apprehending Santini, that would be a lawful act. However, he failed to exercise due caution in applying force. That's 1 to 5 years. He'll be out in 6 months.
Oh, brother. No, I'd have to check with the chief before I could accept that.
All right. Have him study my client's statements, particularly Mrs. Gregg's. I may look over her statement again myself. I may decide we don't have to plead guilty to anything.
Do you have any paintings by Roger Santini of Mexican scenes?
No, sir. These are the most recent Santinis. Sunset abstract.
No. You see, I'm trying to confirm some information that Roger Santini was in Mexico several years ago. I thought, well, maybe if he had some Mexican scenes, I might be able to identify the location.
Well, we had some Mexican Santinis, but we sold them both within a week of each other, just like that. Why? Was Mr. Santini becoming important, I hope?
You'll read about it in the newspapers. Say, did you ever meet Roger Santini?
Oh, sure. He comes in here quite often.
Oh, what's he like?
He's a very nice man. He's quiet, serious. He's, I don't know, the kind of man you feel a lot of sympathy for. When that lady came back and bought the second painting in a row, we had a celebration in the shop.
The same lady came back and bought 2 Santinis in a row? You wouldn't happen to know her name?
Yes, because she told me her husband was a very important man. Mrs. Iverson.
Mrs. Iverson?
Oh, wait. Did she tell me her husband worked for Mr. Iverson? Yes, that's right. And her name was, gee, I don't remember.
Mrs. Gregg.
That's right.
Are you sure of that?
Well, I can check it for you in just a second. Well, that's funny.
What?
The whole Santini page is gone.
Why do you assume that Mr. Iverson is helping me when you don't even know for a fact what information was on that page?
Mr. Gregg, did your wife buy any of Santini's paintings?
I don't know about that sort of thing. You'd have to ask Carla.
Well, Mr. Judd is in the waiting room asking her that right now. But that lady has a track record of telling Mr. Judd just exactly what she thinks will protect you. Any relationship to the truth being purely coincidental.
Oh, Clint, what are you trying to get out of me?
What I need to defend your husband with. The truth, Carla. Not your impression of what it's safe to tell me. Now, did you have anything to do with Santini?
Yes.
Exactly what?
Exactly what I told you. He attacked me.
And did you tell this to your husband before or after he killed Santini? I want the truth this time, Carla. Not just what Iverson says you can tell me.
I'm not consulting Mr. Iverson anymore.
No.
Clint, did you know I was married before?
No.
He was young and very self-centered. He never amounted to much. Whatever it is a woman wants out of marriage, I didn't have. So I worked very hard at getting ready for my next chance. I have what I want now, and I'm not greedy. Does that answer your question?
So that Santini was never a problem before. In other words, you didn't know about him before.
That's correct.
And then why is it we pick up the impression that you were jealous of your wife?
From whom?
The people at the party. The same people who didn't know it was a farewell party.
Because evolution is asymmetrical.
Would you mind translating that?
Some animals can develop very highly in one respect and not at all in others. For example, I'm able to design sophisticated electronic systems, but I can't be very sophisticated myself. Before Carla found me, I was something... Carla found you? When you move up into Iverson's key group, you're invited to their gatherings. Women notice you.
Make a wish, snap your fingers, get anything, even Carla.
I am, believe me, happy. I'm an intensely happy man to have Carla on any terms. It's just that I can't cope with them all at once. I don't fit in with those people. I don't think I ever could. You have to understand what I was, an underpaid technician to the drawing board.
Until you found out what you can do with money.
Yes.
But not how to handle yourself in this kind of stratosphere?
Mr. Judd, just what is it that you're trying to do to me?
Trying to find out how to defend you.
Well, why is it so difficult?
I don't know whether you killed Santini because he attacked your wife or because she was seeing him and you were jealous.
He did attack her.
Do we have any proof of that besides Carla's word?
No.
On the other hand, there is evidence that you displayed jealousy at various times.
I suppose so.
Mr. Gregg, at this point, how would you like to make a deal with the prosecution?
Involuntary manslaughter. Isn't that what you insist on, Mr. Judd?
Well, there isn't that much difference between voluntary and involuntary.
Just a few months.
We might allow our client to plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter.
Is this the best legal representation that Mr. Gregg can get for the kind of money I'm paying?
Well, Mr. Iverson, I think Mr. Judd is trying to do a very creditable job under the circumstances as they shape up now.
What do you mean by now?
We've got a detective division that acts a little slowly sometimes. They got to that art gallery after you did, Mr. Caldwell, which was after Mr. Iverson's people did.
Wait a minute. Be very careful, Mr. McDonald. Can you prove that Mr. Iverson sent anyone to any art gallery?
I asked Mr. Iverson to come and hear what I can prove in the hope that this will affect his attitude toward what my office has to do.
Well,
Well, sir, our slowpoke detectives went to the bank and looked at microfilm records and found some checks written by Mrs. Gregg that prove she's been buying Santini's stuff. In other words, she stated she hadn't seen the man in 7 years. But she's been meeting him at the art gallery, giving him money, bringing him into her home. Are you going to tell me that you really believe that pure coincidence angle?
Mac, just tell me what you believe now.
First, she gave her husband grounds for jealousy. And after he killed Santini, then she tried to help him out with that attack story. I'm sorry, Mr. Iverson.
why, tell me you're sorry.
Because I know Gregg is one of your key employees.
Stop! Right there. If you ever imply in public that I have interfered or would interfere on behalf of this man, I'll file suit against you and your superiors for as much as the libel laws will allow. I want to make it very clear to everyone in this room now that a man's position as an Iverson employee does not entitle him to get away with murder.
Iverson, the word murder has not been used in connection with this case.
But that's exactly what he's coming to, isn't it?
Yes, sir. Murder one. Your Honor, I offer this statement by the defendant in evidence.
So marked.
And I would like to have Sergeant Wagner read portions of it.
Proceed.
Sergeant, the second paragraph, please, where Mr. Gregg explains why he killed Santini.
I asked my wife how she came to be scratched and beaten with her clothing torn. And she said Roger Santini had attacked her.
And read what else Mrs. Gregg said about Santini.
She said Santini had also tried this kind of thing when she knew him in Mexico the year before we were married.
Thank you. Your Honor, at this time, I would like to interrupt the sergeant's testimony in order to call another witness.
Your Honor, this strikes me as highly irregular.
Mr. Judd will get his chance to cross-examine.
Why can't we wait until this witness is finished before we hear another one?
This other witness is an official of a foreign government who is here as a courtesy to us and should not be kept waiting.
I think we can allow Mr. McDonald to display our national good manners.
The prosecution calls Mr. Diego Ramirez of the Mexican Tourist Bureau.
No, sir. There's no visa required of United States citizens who wish to visit Mexico. However, they must obtain a tourist permit.
And did you, at my request, examine your files to see if any such permit was ever issued to Mrs. Gregg, whose name at the time was Carla Morrissey?
Yes, I did.
Was such a permit issued?
No, sir, it was not.
Proving that Roger Santini never tried to attack Mrs. Gregg in Mexico for the simple reason that this lady was never there.
Objection.
I'll withdraw it. Defense may cross-examine.
Mr. Ramirez, I don't quite understand this requirement, the tourist permit. Would I need such a permit, for example, to drive across the border to a city like Tijuana or Mexicali?
No, sir, you don't need a permit just to drive across the border. I was speaking of traveling to the interior, to Mexico City, or the major resorts such as Acapulco, Cuernavaca, and so on.
What about minor resorts such as Ensenada in Baja California, 50 miles below the border? Would I need a permit to go there?
No, sir.
So that Mrs. Gregg could have been in Ensenada, and Roger Santini could have tried to attack her there, and your bureau would know nothing about it. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
Thank you. That's all.
Sergeant Wagner, please return to the stand. Now, once again, to make it very clear, this statement is the one made to you by the defendant's wife.
Yes, by Mrs. Gregg.
In which she states that she met Roger Santini in Mexico 7 years ago.
Yes, sir.
What does the statement say about her seeing him since then?
I did not see Roger Santini or have any contact with him from that time until the night he turned up at my house as a waiter at the party.
Mm-hmm. Did you investigate this statement?
Yes, sir, and I found that Mrs. Gregg had met Santini several times at the Hinkle Art Gallery and purchased 2 of his paintings.
Indicating that her relationship with Santini was something very different from that described in her sworn statement.
Objection, calling for a conclusion. Sustained.
No more questions. Defense may cross-examine.
Cross-examine what, Your Honor? Statements made by my client and his wife?
There's a witness on the stand.
Yes, but he's done nothing but read aloud.
Your Honor, those statements were made on the advice and counsel of Mr. Judd himself, and there is no reason why the prosecution should not use them.
Except that defense cannot cross-examine sheets of paper. If it please the court, I am entitled to question Mrs. Gregg herself. Order, please. Mrs. Gregg, you may proceed to the stand.
I was standing in the gallery looking at one of his paintings. I didn't even know it was his. He came up behind me and he spoke to me.
That was your first contact with Roger Santini since Mexico?
Yes. But, you know, he seemed very changed, subdued, not at all the wild man he was in Mexico, so I asked him how he was doing. He said he wasn't doing very well. I just felt sorry for him.
And you bought, how many of his paintings?
2. And I went back to the shop twice to get them. And both times he was there. I guess he was always hanging around. And that's the whole story of my so-called relationship with Roger Santini.
Until the party at your house?
Yes.
Did you object to his being there?
Well, no, not at first. Until he came up to me and he thanked me for hiring him, and I said, I didn't hire you, the caterer did. And then he grinned that awful grin that he used to grin in Mexico, and he said, don't kid me. Now I've seen your husband, I know what your problem is. Never fear, Roger is here. Then I got scared.
Did you take any measures to prevent trouble?
No, except I stayed away from him all evening. With a house full of guests, I didn't want any scenes. And I didn't really think he'd do anything to me then and there.
You mean in a house full of guests?
Yes. But later on, around midnight, the guests were leaving, so I went out, you know, toward the road to say goodbye to a couple in a car. I never got there. He stopped me.
Mrs. Gregg, I'm obliged to ask you this. Did you call for help?
I tried to, but he put his hand over my mouth.
Did you struggle?
I guess. My gown was all torn.
You say you guess you did?
I don't remember too clearly. Then later, I went back into the house, and all the guests were gone, and the caterer's help were cleaning up, and I had to pass Santini, and he grinned at me. I think he thought that I'd really set up the whole thing, and that I wouldn't tell my husband.
But you did. Tell your husband.
Yes. Yes, God is my witness. I wish I never had.
No further questions.
Mrs. Gregg, You say this attack took place around midnight?
Yes?
Thank you, that's all. Your Honor, the prosecution calls Fred Sherwood.
Fred Sherwood.
And your occupation?
Well, right now I pump gas at the Lakeview Courtesy Service Station.
Are you acquainted with Mr. and Mrs. Gregg?
Yes, sir. It's the closest station to their house. They're regular customers.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Sherwood, do you have any knowledge concerning Mrs. Gregg on the night in question?
Well, I guess so. She pulled into the station at around 11:15 it was. She didn't have her bag, no money, no credit card. She asked me, would I trust her for a couple of gallons of gas so, she wouldn't get stuck. And I filled her whole tank. And I can tell you, it was bone dry.
Mm-hmm. And this was around 11 o'clock?
Yes.
And did Mrs. Gregg then depart in the direction of her home?
No, she went the opposite way. And I saw her turn north on County Road 3.
And was this the last you saw of Mrs. Gregg that evening?
No, I saw her drive back. She's in a big hurry. That was around 1 o'clock.
Then it is your testimony that at 11 o'clock you saw Mrs. Gregg drive away from her home, and at 1 o'clock you saw her drive back again.
Yes, sir.
Indicating that Mrs. Gregg could not have been attacked by a waiter on the grounds of her home at midnight, because at midnight she wasn't there.
Your Honor, in view of the late hour, will you grant a recess until tomorrow?
North on County Road 3?
That's what the man said.
Hello, you two legal beagles. You look as worried as beagles. Shall I tell you what to do?
Yeah. Yeah, why don't you tell us what to do?
Well, you go over the guest list of my party, and you put a few of those people on the stand tomorrow, and they'll say that I was home all evening. Period.
New paragraph. Shall we call only those guests employed by Malcolm Iverson?
Oh, Clint. Freddie Sherwood was mistaken. He's not the brightest man in the first place, and he's always sleeping at that gas station. And you drive up there and you blow your horn. It takes him 15 minutes to find out where the gas pumps are. Whoever he saw on that road that night, it was not me. I mean, why would I drive in the middle of the night to a dead-end road? To spend 2 hours looking at the cow pastures?
Carla, with a little help from you, I just might be able to answer that.
At your service, sir.
Go home and make a phone call for me. I want to charter a helicopter to land in this pasture and pick us up.
Thanks for a smooth ride. Thank you, Mr. Judd. You happen to know any helicopter pilots who work for Malcolm Iverson? I know enough. What do you mean by enough? Enough so that I wouldn't want to work for him. Oh, doesn't he pay well? He pays very well, but apparently when you've flown Mr. Iverson around for a while, you've seen too much. He has you transferred. To where? Any number of places. All of them far away.
I don't see the connection.
Mr. Craig, did you know that it's exactly 12 minutes from Iverson's estate to that field by helicopter?
And it's 4 years to the nearest star by the speed of light. And I don't know anybody traveling either route.
Well, let's put it this way. Was Malcolm Iverson at your house the night of the party?
Mr. Iverson doesn't go to parties.
That's not what I asked you.
Carla would have told you, wouldn't she?
Has Carla told us one single thing that we haven't had to drag out of her?
I don't think I have to apologize for the fact that my wife is trying to protect me.
Are you sure that it's you that your wife is trying to protect?
I don't care much for that implication. But it seems to me that this is a simple case. Santini attacked my wife.
I don't think one single member of the jury believes that anymore.
Well, suppose they believe that Carla was having an affair with him. I'm still protected.
By what?
The unwritten law.
Norman, let me set you straight on the so-called unwritten law. It might have influenced the jury in your favor if you had found them together. But you found nothing of the sort. And there is no law, written or unwritten, that allows you to go out and murder a man just because you were jealous.
Look, would you kindly tell me what it is you're getting at? Mr. Iverson, and how could he come to or from the house from that field?
Carla was seen driving to that field and 2 hours later driving back. In between, she could have made another trip that was not seen.
But why did she come back to the house, scratched? She was beaten, her gown torn. Would you tell me that?
That is what I want to ask Carla, under oath, on the witness stand.
Well, there's no sense in that. You already had her in the stand once.
Yes, but then she was a court witness, testifying only to her own sworn statement. This time she would be a defense witness, but I can't call her without your permission.
Well, you won't get it. I can't let you do that to her.
Can't? Can't? Why can't you?
Because afterwards things wouldn't be the same between us.
Between who? Between you and your wife, or you and Iverson?
Stop, damn you! If I do this to her, I'll lose her. I'll lose Carla. I'm sorry. What can I simply say? I love my wife.
Okay, we don't call Carla to the stand.
Okay, we do the next best thing.
I mean, there is a next best thing?
We call Mr. Iverson. Mr. Iverson, on the night of Santini's murder, were you in the Greggs' house?
Your Honor, may I appeal to the court?
Yes.
On the advice of counsel, I point out that my personal reputation is of economic concern to tens of thousands of stockholders of Iverson Industries. For their sake, I ask the court's protection against such slurs, smears, and innuendo as the defense attorney may attempt, whether in malice...
Mr. Iverson, regardless of your stockholders' problems, you must answer all proper questions. Unless, of course, you refuse on grounds of self-incrimination.
Which would give your stockholders outright conniptions, Mr. Iverson.
That is a deliberate smear, Your Honor, as Mr. Iverson's attorney.
As an attorney, you should know better. One more outburst, and I'll have you cited for contempt of court.
We're off to a promising start.
Proceed, Mr. Judd.
To repeat the question. Mr. Iverson, on the night of Santini's murder, were you
In the Gregg house. No, I was not.
You were not in the Greggs' house that night. Very well, Mr. Iverson. Do you have a helicopter at your personal disposal?
Yes?
Did you have one that night?
Yes.
Did you use it to fly to the Greggs' home?
No, I did not.
Did you use it to have Carla Gregg flown to your house?
I don't remember.
Mr. Iverson, you are among the biggest of the big executives. A man with a mind like the memory storage unit of an advanced computer. Do you think your stockholders would believe that you can't remember having had another man's wife flown to your home on that night?
I may have had Mrs. Gregg over at various times. I'm not sure of this particular time.
Please tell the court the name of your helicopter pilot.
I don't remember. We have a large number of pilots, both helicopter and fixed-wing aircraft, working for Iverson Industries.
Yes, but this is your personal pilot.
Was. He's been transferred to another post.
Where and for what reason?
I don't remember.
Will it refresh your memory if I suggest to you that his name is Eugene Miller.
No, it would not.
Or that he is presently flying a helicopter for your offshore oil drilling operation in the Black Sea?
No.
Or that I was able to reach him by telephone in Istanbul last
All right,
night?
Mr. Judd, what is it you want me to remember the man's name?
More than his name. Did he or did he not fly Carla Gregg to your house at approximately 11 o'clock that night?
Yes, he did.
And did he or did he not fly her back at approximately 1 o'clock?
Yes.
Now, will you please tell the court what, if anything, happened to Carla Gregg on the way back?
On the way back?
Yes, Mr. Iverson. You weren't present, but it was reported to you by your pilot. And you certainly paid the bill, so you're competent to testify to it. What happened?
There was a minor accident on landing. The rotor bearing froze. The copter fell a few feet. Mrs. Gregg was thrown to the ground. She wasn't hurt seriously.
Just scratched.
Yes.
Her gown torn.
So I understand.
That's all.
That's all.
Unless the district attorney has some questions.
No questions.
You may step down, Mr. Iverson. Well,
You want to call Carla?
yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, I do. Of course I want to help my husband.
In that case, Carla, I'm going to ask you some personal questions. Very personal. Let's call them rough questions. And I'll advise you, Carla, as an old friend and your attorney, as well as your husband's attorney, that the only thing that will help him now is the absolute truth. Stripped to the core, without any protective garments. Now, if there's any question that you feel that you're unwilling to answer with the naked truth, just tell me and I'll withdraw the question. But no more lying, Carla. Your husband's case just can't stand it.
All right.
All right. Now, you stated that you wanted to help your husband. Is this because you love him?
Yes, I do.
I said the naked truth, Carla. Was that it?
Well, maybe I don't know how you define love.
Well, how do you define it? In terms of the material benefits a husband can provide? How much money a wife can accumulate in her own name? How much property she can acquire when they get divorced? Or let me put it this way. Never spill out a pail of dirty water until you're sure you can get a pail of clean water?
Clint.
You can just tell me you're not willing to answer the question.
I'm not willing.
I withdraw it. Now, were you, married to someone before Norman Gregg?
Yes.
A man without much property?
Yes.
And did you institute divorce proceedings against your first husband before or after you met Norman Gregg?
I don't understand that.
Before or after the pail of clean water, Carla? You found your way into the Iverson Key Group. You found Norman Gregg, a man with the ability to design sophisticated circuits, which made him a member of a new American aristocracy. And I imagine that from the moment you met Norman Gregg, you knew you could marry into that aristocracy. Isn't that true, Carla?
Yes, I suppose so.
And did you then decide that you could move up, trade up in the manner of trading up houses and cars? Were you doing that with husbands?
No, I will never admit that.
And were you then satisfied to keep Norman, or did you immediately look around for another trade, another way of improving your position even more?
I don't even know how to...
Were you having an affair with Malcolm Iverson with a view to making him your next husband? Carla, if you tell this jury anything less than the truth, you will shortly have no husband who will do you any good. Were you having an affair with Malcolm Iverson?
Yes, I was.
Thank you. Order. Well, now that we understand your attitudes, your goals, your ambitions, Carla, let's turn back to the events of the night Santini was killed. Did Mr. Iverson call you up and say that he was sending over a helicopter to take you to him?
Yes.
You tell the court what happened on the way home.
Well, there was this helicopter accident. And when I got home, I looked like I'd been beaten up. And before I had a chance to change, Norman saw me. So, well, I had to say something. I I couldn't really tell him what happened.
Because then you would have had to tell him that you'd been with Mr. Iverson.
Yes.
What did you tell him?
I told him it was Santini.
That Santini attacked you?
Yes.
In fact, did Santini so much as touch you?
No.
What was your true relationship with Santini?
I met him at the gallery a couple times when I bought some of his paintings.
And the truth about the advances he made to you in Mexico?
I never was in Mexico, but I knew from his paintings that he'd been there. And so I just made up the rest to make it look more convincing that he would actually attack me.
In other words, to convince your husband to turn his anger against a completely innocent man?
Yes, but...
But what?
But I didn't know Norman would kill him.
Oh, no, of course not, and we all sympathize with you. But when you considered yourself only a commodity to be sold at the highest cost, according to the law of supply and demand, how could you possibly know that Norman would react so violently? So much like a man who loves a woman. Your only concern was that you not spoil your chances with Mr. Iverson. Your chances for another trade. Isn't that true, Carla? I'm sure we can all answer that one for ourselves. May it please the court, the defense rests. Your Honor, I have conceded to the district attorney that a terrible crime was committed that night by one of my clients, but not principally by the one on trial.
Counsel for both sides may approach the bench.
Your Honor, it would appear that the defendant did believe the deceased attacked his wife, however mistaken, and did proceed in the heat of passion, however unjustified. The state will therefore consent to reducing the charge to voluntary manslaughter.
Your Honor, defendant would like to enter a new plea to that charge.
Very well. The defendant will rise. Norman Gregg, you are charged with voluntary manslaughter in the killing of Roger Santini. How do you plead?
Guilty.
Very well. All of the charges are dismissed. Sentence will be passed 1 week from today. Bail is set at $5,000. This court stands adjourned.
Well, Mr. Judd, you were right. Engineers, the new American aristocracy. I thought I was becoming part of it. But what did I turn out to be? You called it. A pail of dirty water. So, what can you do with money?
Oh, don't knock it too hard. Go along with Ben. He'll show you.
What?
What you can do with money? Put up bail.